Hi, this is Truth Seeker here, and I don't have to say to all of you how crazy it's been this year. It's definitely been crazy. So I thought that maybe I would put together a video that kind of is a little bit more on the lighter side, in the sense that it deals with some of the things that you might not have known about the Bible Students Movement, about the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, some of the crazy things that Bible students believe, some of the things that carried on until my time in the Bible students, and how a culture had developed that lasted all the way until the present. And so I thought I'd present that to you today. So today, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is a multi-billion-dollar organization. After over 100 years located in Brooklyn, New York, and even before that, from 1874 to 1909, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society was located in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. The Watchtower has, over that period, accrued billions of dollars, became a tax-free organization. They don't pay taxes. And beginning around 2011, began the process of selling their properties in Brooklyn for more than $1 billion, probably close to a couple $1 billion, to purchase properties in the Ramapo Hills, 45 miles north of Manhattan. And with the monies that they've collected from their growing membership, it's about over 8 million strong, and the real estate that they've sold, they are building state-of-the-art facilities and properties in this area, this corner of New York State. And as you can see here, this is the new headquarters that opened up operations in 2017. And today they are really run like a major corporation with all of these assets that they have. Hardly what you would expect from an organization that just started out with 5 individuals, and a newsletter that probably only reached a couple thousand people altogether. And but throughout its history, Watchtower has preached one thing and often did another thing. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that maybe some people might not, who might have come from these or from this organization or in the Bible students, about some of the things that they did, the people that they had working or associated with them, that might be a little bit surprising. I certainly didn't know much of this information myself until I did some research when I began to question my faith. Despite the fact that I grew up a Bible student, and my family I was a 4th generation Bible student, and my family both sides on my maternal and paternal side of my family. My family went back to the founder's time, Charles Taze Russell. I didn't know much of some of these things that I subsequently learned, and you can confirm independently by doing a little research yourself in the reprints and some other aspects of history. It'd be interesting to really be able to look into Watchtower's archives, especially those archives that were made available to A.H. Macmillan in the 1950s when he wrote his book, what is it, Faith Marches On. It was 1957. It was the first book, documented history of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. It wasn't actually a publication of the society. A.H. Macmillan had authored it himself while he was an active member of the society, and he had access to their materials. He was given permission to those archives, and I'd love to see what he was able to see. I'm not even sure those documents exist. About a year ago, I had a call from Barbara Anderson. I had left a note on her website saying I was a Bible student, that a former Bible student, and that my family went back many years. And about a year after I had left this note, I even forgot that I had left the note on her website. I think it's JW Documents or something like that. It's a website where you can get publications, documents that normally you wouldn't be able to access otherwise. She used to work in the records department, Barbara Anderson, at Bethel, and so she had access to information that most of us didn't have access to. Interestingly enough, she has a lot of information right now of Charles Taze Russell. It'd be nice if she would put that together and publish it. But anyway, there's still quite a bit that you can glean about Charles Russell and the Watchtower Society, just from the information that they published. So I'm going to just talk about some of these things that I found interesting, that I had no knowledge of whatsoever. Most of us Bible students and many Jehovah's Witnesses know about the let's say, almost an obsessive interest that Charles Taze Russell had in the Great Pyramid of Giza. Somehow, some way, he must have gotten a hold of the writings of Charles Piazzi Smythe. Now, Charles Piazzi Smythe was a Scottish scientist. He was an astronomer. He was what they called the Astronomer Royal of Scotland, for Scotland. And he made some contributions to science. But for the most part, he was a pseudoscientific whack job. He was a very religious man, and he was influenced by the writings of a John Taylor, who was a pyramidologist, who believed that the pyramid was something that was sanctioned by God. And so his writings got into the hands of Charles Piazzi Smythe, and Smythe just took it and ran. Taylor was not of anybody of note from an academic perspective, but Smythe was, and he wrote a couple of treatises, I guess you could call them, on the Great Pyramid, basically promoting them as something that God had a hand in the building of. And he promoted this idea of the pyramid inch, and he derived this measurement called the pyramid inch. And Russell, now Smythe began writing in the 1860s, 1870s, and I believe Russell got a hold of one of these publications, and he took it and ran with it, and he came up with his own interpretation that the plan of God was somehow depicted in the Great Pyramids, the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber and the descending passage and the Grand Gallery, and he made a type out of all of these things. Back in the 19th century, there was a lot of interest in the Bible as sort of a written in code. This idea. William Miller really got started with this concept, especially with time prophecies. But Russell really believed that the Bible was written in to picture things. The tabernacle was something. The tabernacle of Israel in the desert of sin after the Egyptian experience. He thought that every aspect of the tabernacle had some spiritual significance, and so everything had a specific type. The bull represented Jesus, the goat, the ram that represented Jesus, and the sacrifice, the acceptance of the sacrifice, and the goat represented the great company, and the different chambers of the tabernacle, the holy and the most holy. And the different, you had the table of showbread and the candlesticks in the holy, and in the most holy you had the Ark of the Covenant with the cherubim and the Shekinah glow, and everything had a representation. And Russell did the same thing with the Great Pyramid, and all of these different the passages and the chambers all had some kind of spiritual significance, and he was able to derive, with his measurements, derive different times that he felt were significant in prophecy, especially 1914. 1914 figured prominently with Charles Russell. Charles Piazzi Smythe and Russell did correspond, and Russell, he I believe had privilege or had the approval of Piazzi Smythe to use Smythe's illustrations in the studies in the scriptures, and so the illustrations that you see of the Great Pyramid and the passages were all from Charles Piazzi Smythe's publications. And Smythe himself actually wrote a if not the forward, a forward. I believe it was in the third volume of the Studies in the Scripture series, approving of, if not the exact doctrine or teachings of Russell, at least the general idea that Russell was onto, the idea that God's plan is being depicted in the Great Pyramid. And but this business with pyramidology has been something that really, extends beyond Russell, extends beyond Smythe, and Bible students themselves really took to it obsessively. There were the Edgar brothers, John Edgar. He was a medical practitioner. Dr. John Edgar and his brother Morton were obsessed with the pyramid. They wrote extensively. They held pretty prominent positions with the Watchtower Society. John Edgar actually was mentioned in Russell's will as being a potential director, but he had died in 1912. Russell's will was first drafted in 1907 and never was updated. So Edgar had died. John Edgar had died before Russell had, but his name is in the will. So if you check that out, Morton Edgar lived into the 1950s. Now, Bible students didn't leave it there. There were other Bible students that picked up on it. Morton Edgar's work, and through the 1960s and 70s, when I was growing up as a young boy and a teenager, there were Bible students who made the Great Pyramid the focus of their work and the studies. They organized trips to the Great Pyramid, and they'd go crawling around in the pyramid and finding new things, new light in the pyramid. There were these annual trips where Bible students would maybe 20, 30 of them would go to Egypt and go crawling around in the Great Pyramids, and then take a sidebar trip to the Holy Land and take the tour to see all the places that Jesus frequented. But the main tour stop was the Great Pyramid. I had personal friends who went. I was only 18. I didn't go, but I had friends my age who went on one of those pyramid trips. And a number of years ago, about maybe 10 years ago, I like mathematics, and I found a book at Barnes & Noble on the golden number, and it was written by the renowned astrophysicist Mario Livio. And to my surprise, there was a chapter early in this book on the golden number, and it's a legitimate mathematics book on the golden number and all the different ways it shows up in nature, where he discusses the Great Pyramid. And Mario Livio had noted that there were many individuals who tried to show that the Great Pyramid had Fibonacci numbers, and the golden ratio are connected. They're very strongly connected, and many individuals try to show that the Great Pyramid, like the Parthenon, used the golden ratio in its construction. And Livio goes into some of the history of pyramidology. And he talked about Taylor. He talked about Charles Piazzi Smythe. He didn't mention Russell, but he did mention that there were others that were taken up by the pyramid. There was this, for some reason, this obsession that the pyramid with the Great Pyramid, and he called them pyramidiots in this book, and that term stuck in my mind. I just couldn't help but think of that. That's really what this is. They're a bunch of people that have obsessed over something with absolutely no fabrication. And why are people like that? I mean, why? This is the kind of people that were originally attracted by the teachings of Charles Russell. Now, granted, at the time, science was really in the means of developing, and Newtonian physics was about the only thing until Einstein came around. And so it was hard especially for the average person, because most people weren't educated. They didn't have college. Most people didn't have college educations. The majority of Americans in the 19th century were illiterate. And so they weren't able to really discern between what was legitimate and what wasn't legitimate. And so you had a lot of this pseudoscientific stuff that was being promoted. Russell himself had no more than a 7th grade education. And he was this great teacher who was supposedly superior to all of these. There is well documented that he he was antagonistic towards what they called higher criticism. I know that was the term he used then, and he's teaching the higher critics, the truth, that most people didn't know the truth. He had the truth. So that was one of the things that I think a lot of, especially Jehovah's Witnesses, don't realize the extent to which the pyramid was embedded within Bible student lore and teachings. It was really almost a fundamental doctrine at the time of Russell. Another thing is that Russell, he wrote about humility all the time. Humility was one of the biggest character traits. Russell was really big on writing about Christian character development. In fact, that was what differentiated him from Rutherford. Rutherford was more on action, and that salvation came by acts, whereas Russell was more about Christian development, and Christian development motivated action. And so the focus wasn't so much on the door-to-door in the days of Russell, although they had the Cole Porter service, and Russell really wanted to build up the numbers. There was an interesting statement made by A.H. Macmillan in one of the I think there's if you go to YouTube and do a search on YouTube, somebody has posted a couple of talks that A.H. Macmillan gave later in life, and he was recalling some of the early years, because A.H. Macmillan was one of the early associates of Charles Russell. In fact, he had a prominent position at the Bethel home near the end of Russell's life, and although he was significantly younger than Russell himself, he did have I think he was one of the managers of the Bethel home. And Macmillan mentioned that he had a talk with Russell, and I don't think that we have any reason to doubt that the veracity of this account, that some weeks before Russell passed away, he had a long discussion with Macmillan, and he had mentioned in this talk that Russell had noted that as hard as they tried, they couldn't get the numbers of the movement much more than 50,000 or so. So that gave some kind of an idea of the pre-Rutherford, the size of the movement globally, of acknowledged members of the Watchtower Society, who were at that time all known as Bible students. There were no Jehovah's Witnesses until the 1930s. So they did make an effort to grow the movement, but Russell really spent a lot of time, a lot of his writing on character, what you would call Christian character development, and most of that was the sixth volume was, which was by far the most voluminous in size of any of the 6 volumes written by Russell. The sixth volume is certainly the most voluminous, and it goes into great detail about what the Christian character should be. And humility plays a large role in it. But then we take a look at that, and then we see some elements of Russell's behavior, thinking, actions that run counter to this idea of humility. One of them is this wise and faithful servant. Now, many Bible students, well, I grew up in the movement, in the Bible student movement. It was clear that most Bible students thought that Charles Russell himself was the wise and faithful servant. Today, in their own translation, the Jehovah's Witnesses call this the faithful and discreet slave, which they believe is now the collective governing body. There's been a variety of interpretations on that scripture. Initially, Bible students applied that to Charles Russell, who was the founder of the Watchtower Society. And for some number of years afterwards, until Rutherford pretty much did away with that idea. He said that the society itself was the wise and faithful servant and the channel of truth. And he tried to do away with what they call creature worship, because the movement, too much of the movement was loyal to Russell's teachings and to Russell himself, and it actually provided an obstacle to Rutherford's objectives, which were to have more control over the society and to grow the society. So Rutherford really paved the way by transitioning the society and removing those that were loyal to Russell. But Russell, in reality, was not all that humble a man, because in private, he believed that he fulfilled that scripture personally as the wise and faithful servant. And so this idea of humility, he's preaching one thing, that worldly titles, worldly accomplishments, didn't mean much. That really the world was controlled by Satan. In fact, actually, one of the slides of the photodrama of creation shows Satan as an instructor, a college instructor, to a young student who's impressionable, and certainly the devil was influencing this young man with evil ideas of evolution and ideas of how the world was created that differed from the Bible. But not only that, and Macmillan acknowledges that in private, Russell wouldn't promote this idea from the platform, but in private he did acknowledge. Macmillan said Russell did acknowledge that he believed that he fulfilled the role of the wise and faithful servant who's feeding meat in due season to God's people. But when you look at Russell and this idea of humility, there are a couple of things that stand out that kind of stood out to me. There were some individuals that became members of the Watchtower Society. One of them was a Civil War general, a prominent Civil War general. There weren't that many lieutenant generals in the Civil War. There probably were more in the South. I think the only one in the North fighting for the Union was Ulysses S. Grant. In the South, you had Jefferson Davis, who appointed generals, lieutenant generals, and one of them was Robert E. Lee. But they had a number of individuals that made the rank of lieutenant general. One of them was Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a cavalry general. Many people know him as the originator of the Ku Klux Klan. And there was Braxton Bragg, and there was Joe Johnston, and A. P. Stewart, Alexander P. Stewart. Now, Alexander P. Stewart, he was located, he came from Alabama, and he was located in the what they called the Western Theater of the Civil War. Anything near the Mississippi River was really considered the Western Theater of the Civil War. And Stewart was one of the longest to live. He was the last lieutenant general of the Civil War to pass away, which he did in 1908. Later in life, when he was quite elderly, somehow Stewart got a hold of Russell's writings and converted and was baptized, and he became a Bible student. I don't know how many years he was, but it was for several years while he was in his 80s. He lived into his 80s. He was quite elderly for his time. And now, this is interesting. Now, Stewart died on August 30th, 1908. Now, the Bible students held their general convention. It was a 7 or 8 day convention. That year, it was being held in Put-in Bay, which is an island in Lake Erie. And it was the convention spanned late August into the first week of September. And they had thousands of Bible students that were in attendance at that particular convention. And as soon as news came to Russell, who was in attendance at that convention, he was the keynote, what you would call today as the keynote speaker, the key guy at that convention. That's why all the brethren went there. It was really to hear Russell, to see Russell, and to get a chance to. I know my grandfather went from the Midwest all the way to Washington, D.C., and I understand it was around 1910 where there was a convention in Washington, D.C., just to get a chance to hear Charles Russell speak. And so he was the man. He was the guy that they went to see. And as soon as news arrived that A.P. Stewart had passed away, Russell bolted. He left that convention. It was a photo op, basically. He knew that A.P. Stewart, being the last lieutenant general of the Civil War, was going to be big news. And in those days, the only media that they had were newspapers. So this was going to be published in thousands of newspapers. And it was in Stewart's will, or I guess his family, had asked Russell to give the eulogy. So Russell left the convention and just to get to Stewart's funeral in St. Louis, Missouri. That's where he passed away. And Russell did. He went out there and delivered the eulogy, and it was published in I don't know how many thousands of papers. And it wasn't only in the United States, but abroad. So this was a perfect opportunity to get free publicity for the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society and a little personal notoriety for himself. And so here, we talk about humility, and there was no other reason for it. I mean, if Russell was so humble, he would have overlooked this opportunity. He would have put the matter in the Lord's hands, and he would have stayed where the spiritual meat was most needed, which was at the General Convention. But I guess whatever he had to say, and I can't imagine him saying a whole lot because Stewart's legacy was really that of a Confederate general. And to do this, what was it that Stewart stood for? I mean, A.P. Stewart hadn't really changed much as a man. The little I read about him was that he had a winter home in Biloxi, Mississippi, on the Gulf, and he was a Southerner at heart. He had taken up to the Southern cause, and I don't think that his whatever ideas, prejudices that he may have had changed overnight. You got to remember that the Bible students movement was mostly a white movement, and even to this day is largely, predominantly white. Not that they, I can't say that they're prejudiced by any of their actions or teachings today, but for some reason, back then, I think it was a little bit more so. It appealed more to the whites, and I don't think that the movement really was all that conducive to people of color. Certainly, there weren't many, and in the Bible students movement at the time. And I know that many point to that article, Can the Tiger Change Its Stripes? Another interesting little factoid about Russell was as the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society was growing and getting more attention worldwide basis, Russell sought opportunities to expand the organization globally. And he was going to do this through missionary effort. Now, of course, he believed that the fulfillment of Scripture was that the truth would be taught in all nations, and then the end would come. And so he was going to do what he could to fulfill that prophecy. And so he formed a committee that was an international missionary committee, and in this committee he had 6 individuals that he had assigned to be a part of this. Now, this was a high priority committee because this really was something that promoted the Watchtower, promoted the teachings, the doctrines, and so these individuals that he selected had a pretty large role for the society in those days. And it's interesting to note, when you take a look, there's a photograph, a famous photograph, and I'm going to put that up right now. Now, this photograph that we see here is of the International Missionary Committee that Russell hand selected these individuals. Now, 3 of these people, one of whom you see here with a circle around his head, we'll get to him in a minute. That's William Preble Hall. Now, he was a U.S. general, and we'll elaborate on him in a little bit. But there's one individual here whose title was doctor, and another one professor. So of these 6 individuals here in the committee, 3 of them were identified in the caption of the photograph as professor, general, and doctor. Now, Russell was the one that emphasized that worldly titles, worldly accomplishments were nothing, that they really didn't mean anything. Our goal was to grow in Christ, and he discouraged the use of such things as titles. These are the world is controlled by Satan, and all the institutions that promote accolades and build up people's character and puff them up in pride were institutions that were being influenced by Satan. And yet Russell promotes this picture with these titles. The other 3 individuals, I understand, were wealthy individuals. That they were businessmen, and they had quite a bit of money, more so than the average Bible student, and so they had some prestige, at least from a worldly point of view. Now, look at this picture here. Russell is seated in front. It's almost as if you got the king sitting in a throne with his vassals standing behind him. And this is not a picture that promotes the idea of humility at all. And there are 2 of these pictures, if not more. I've seen a couple of photos, one with a darker background. I don't think they're the same photo, but at least 2 of them were taken. And it certainly doesn't give the idea that this is a very humble man that is that taught that worldly accomplishments were meaningless. So I thought that this was definitely an interesting thing. Now, for the man with the circle, that's a General Hall. Now, Hall became a Bible student in the early 1900s. I don't know exactly the year he was baptized, but at the time of the formation of the International Committee, he was still employed as an active general in the United States Army. He had joined the Bible Students Movement while he was the Adjutant General of the United States of America, reporting directly to General Blackjack Pershing. Now, many who know American history would remember that Blackjack Pershing was the chief of staff, the equivalent of what we would call today the chiefs of staff. They didn't have that back then, but he was the senior general of U.S. forces, or what they called the U.S. Expeditionary Force, that was sent over to Europe when the United States joined as an ally to England and France against Germany in World War I. So General Pershing was the top general in the United States Army at that time. And so this gives you an idea of the prestige that Preble Hall had, William Preble Hall had within the U.S. Army. He did retire in 1912, and he remained as far as anybody can tell, loyal to the Watchtower Society until his death, which was 1927. So he lived quite a few years after his joining the Bible Students Movement, and yet he very rapidly rose in prominence at the time of Russell. He found a lot of favor with Russell. In fact, I think there was a 1910 General Convention program with William Preble Hall as one of the featured speakers, and the photograph of the speakers in the program showed Hall in his full uniform. That's something that you wouldn't see in either the Bible students or the Jehovah's Witnesses today. But back then, that was an impressive thing, and I think Russell used whatever tactic he could to encourage people. Now, William Preble Hall was a renowned general because he also was a Medal of Honor winner, and there are not many of those like it was a contest. He was awarded a recipient. I should have said recipient of the Medal of Honor. He fought in the Indian Wars. He also fought in the Spanish-American War, but in the 1870s and 1880s, he fought in the Indian Wars, what they called the Indian Wars, which was really a terrible atrocity, a tragic part of American history, where we took Native Americans, indigenous to this country, and resided here for thousands of years peacefully in this land, and relocated them to dispense with these people because of the potential to enrich white settlers. The Black Hills were there was a gold rush in the Black Hills, and the Plains Indians, the Dakota Indians, or Lakota Indians, were living in the vicinity, and they were all rounded up and put into reservations. I mean, the way we treated Native Americans in the 19th century was scandalous, was awful, and people at that time knew it was awful. Yet this man was awarded the Medal of Honor for fighting against the native peoples whose land it was. That was their land. But to most Americans, and probably to Charles Russell, they were savages, and that it wasn't a big deal to take these people and do. They were almost less than human to them. And so here was this Medal of Honor recipient who was second in command in the United States Army to General Pershing, and he's a member of the Watchtower Society. And so this runs hypocritical to this idea of character development. I was never taught any of these things when I was a kid. And so I think, seeing these and understanding these things about the movement, about the man himself, it speaks a lot about Charles Taze Russell. And Bible students, even today, place Charles Russell on a pedestal. They quote from his reprint articles as if they were quoting from the Bible. And so, this bespeaks of a man who was just a very flawed human being. And he wasn't just a human, he was a very mentally flawed individual. And I won't even go into the relationship he had with his wife, which was pretty cruel. He did some very, very cruel things to her. Luckily, she did have some friends, and she made out all right. But I'm not going to go into real details about that relationship. But I'm not even going to mention much more than there have been some scandals with him about their quote unquote foster daughter, Rose Ball. But that's an interesting story too. But so these were the people that Russell had around him and surrounded himself with, and it shows it's kind of like what we see today, the contrast between what our leaders say today and what they do, and it's the same way. Maybe we're more sensitive to our current leadership today because of our experience of hypocrisy that we grew up with, and that as we became aware of these things. Now, there are a couple of other things that I researched lately. A lot of people know about miracle wheat, and that is pretty well known. And a lot of people try to scandalize the Watchtower over the miracle wheat. This wheat was a sign of the times that we were living in, and that it was going to be somehow instrumental in the kingdom and feeding all the billions of people that would be resurrected. And you can only, for I forget some exorbitant price at the time, for a bushel you could have some of this miracle wheat, which would yield far more than normal wheat, whatever normal wheat is, and the profits would go to the Watchtower Society and to the good work that they were doing. And so And that became quite scandalous. But the Watchtower, it bespoke of the predilections, the penchant that Russell had for things that were offbeat, things that were strange. And some these things they carried down through the years into the Bible students movement, even to the present day. For example, not having learned any lesson about miracle wheat, the Watchtower promoted things like millennial beans. Now, my goodness, who has ever heard of a millennial bean? My God! But if you go into the 1908 Watchtower and do a search on bean, you'll find some references to these millennial beans, and apparently some sister had a beanstalk in Nebraska that she said yielded, I don't know, tenfold, always biblical. They had some kind of, maybe it was 7 times or something like that. It's always a biblical thing. But these beans were far more prolific than the average bean, and so they named them millennial beans. You can't believe the names that they came up with: miracle wheat and millennial beans, and who knows? I think there were other things like that too. But they advertised these beans, and you could buy, I think it was, oh my God, now we're talking 1908. I don't know what inflation, you would have to go to one of those calculators, but certainly $1 today was a significant, $1 in 1908 was a really significant amount of money for an individual. Henry Ford paid, I think it was, what was that, $5 a day for his line workers, and that was far more than his competitors. So Ford beat the unions and paid his workers well, above average wage, and so he had no problem finding workers for his assembly lines. $1 really was a lot of money back in 1908. And I think you could buy something like $1 a bean. And the proceeds, of course, went to the Watchtower. But $1 a bean? And of course, you would reap far many beans out of this, and maybe it was 5 beans for $1. I forget, but it was an exorbitant price. And they explained how to hill it right, and it was just laughable to me that anybody would fall for this stuff. But this is the type of thing that, it was almost like snake oil. And, to mix this in with religion is really odd, because there was always this element of money and money making, purchasing in sort of a profit motive in the Watchtower, to, of course, spread the truth. That's what the whole thing was. But spreading the truth meant expanding the organization, and expanding the organization meant Russell was in charge of a larger and larger group, and the more people that you have prestige over, the more powerful a person you are, and you influence. So this was not a trivial matter, but I just love the names that they come up with. These things, Millennial Bean. I never heard of it when I was growing up. I may have heard of Miracle Wheat, but these are the things that many Bible students just avoided telling us kids as we were growing up. In fact, I'm not even sure how much my father even knew of some of these things. I think that his parents may have kept quiet about some of the stuff, and they were from Russell's era. But anyway, you got the Millennial Bean, and I found that in the 1908 reprints. Also, there was the topical cream that cured cancer. Now, that one had a potential to do harm. If this now they promoted this thing. Now, why they would go into the business of promoting stuff, I don't know. It certainly didn't. It shouldn't have been. They shouldn't have. They shouldn't have been. This is something that, you see, this is something that was inherent within the movement. They just didn't trust society. They didn't trust science. They didn't trust medicine. They didn't trust anything. Although the miracles were happening around them, engineering marvels were happening around them. The world was transforming from the Dark Ages. Within 150, 200 years, people were living, practically leaving practically a serf's life. In fact, serfdom didn't end until 1864 in Russia. There were still serfs. There were slaves in 1864, only 35, 40 years before the time that we're talking about. And they were seeing the world transform around them, and they placed no trust whatsoever because it was all the devil, and so they ignored truth, and they ignored science, and they promoted things that they put. They instilled distrust in the world and in the world's institutions, medicine and such, and they promoted things that had absolutely no evidence were true whatsoever, and they were responsible for that. They're as a disseminator of information, they were responsible for that. Because it impacts people. What if I really, what if I only had $5 and I bought $5 worth of Millennial Beans? So then my kids go without soup tonight, people, especially then, weren't very affluent, and so, or very well educated. My grandfather only had an 8th grade education. My paternal grandfather, Russell himself, only had a 7th grade education. My father and his siblings were the first in their family to have a high school education. Well, my grandmother may have had one. It's hard for me to know. But people went to schools for secretarial skills or whatever, but they didn't go to college. Not many people went to college, and Russell he really was kind of playing on people and their ignorance at that time. And so this topical cream, I think, is probably what they called black salve. He doesn't explain it in the article very well, except that it is known to cure cancer. And that's a very dangerous thing because certain skin cancers are incurable. Melanoma and they can metastasize, and not that doctors necessarily, medicine was really that far advanced, but certainly it was better to get medical treatment than it was to put your trust in some hoax. And it left a legacy. It left a mindset that carried from generation to generation. And at a certain point, it did make a difference. I knew people who died of cancer because they wanted to take Hoxie treatment over going to getting chemotherapy for cancer, and who knows if they had a chance or not, that they threw away. Because they chose Hoxie treatment. Now, this is the type of thing that Bible students had a tendency for. Golden seal. I remember growing up, and family friends had a golden seal that they were taking as a nutritional supplement, that they were using as a poultice on infections and sores, wounds, and every application that you could think. And I remember one time my friend and I, we're just kids, teenagers, right? We could go out in the woods. And my friend, he had lived in the city. He didn't know much about the woods. I grew up in a more rural area of New York. We were only 45 minutes out of the city, and we went to the New York City Ecclesia. But it was still fairly rural in the area that I am, where I grew up. It was it rapidly expanded into suburbia, and now it's much more urban. But my friend didn't know anything about poison ivy, and I guess as a kid, you don't think of it. And he was very badly allergic to it. And he was traveling with us. He had stayed over at my house, and we'd gone out in the woods. He caught poison ivy, and we were he was going to drive with us, my family, to the General Convention, which was held in Bloomington, Indiana that year, 1971. I was 16 in 1971. And he got the worst case of poison ivy I ever saw on anybody. He had it from head to foot. His eyes swelled shut. He was going into anaphylactic shock. And I remember he was swollen, his eyes shut. He was in serious shape. And his mother plastered this golden seal. I don't know if you know what golden seal is. Look it up online. It's some sort of an herb, and it's green. It's sort of an olive green. And she made a poultice out of this and then spread it over his face and arms, and he looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon. I took a photograph, and he got really mad, and he chased me around. I had a Polaroid instant camera at the time, and he got really mad at me. But he ended up going to the infirmary there at the university. It was University of Indiana that hosted the Bible Students General Convention, and he had to get an adrenaline shot, and then within a day or two he was fine. He was in pretty serious shape though. But this is the characteristic of the Bible students. I knew people who gave up their lives because they didn't want to go the route of conventional medicine. I remember one very dear, close sister who went to Mexico for heat treatment in lieu of chemotherapy, in lieu of radical treatment. Granted, it was radical, but it gave her a chance of living, and that was forfeited because it metastasized. This hokey treatment didn't work, and they were promoters of this idea of taking loads of vitamins. Now, many Bible students got involved in this. It's like a pyramid scheme called Shackley. I don't know if anybody knows anything about it, but it's sort of like, what is that, where you buy everything in bulk and you sell it? I can't remember. People have approached me with these things. Sort of, what's the one where you get the pink cars? On my mind, I can't think. But anyway, it was sort of a pyramid scheme, and you went. They didn't sell these things over the counter. They were supposed to be superior vitamins and made in natural ways, and so they were supposed to be better. But this idea carried down through generations of Bible students, these ideas. And chiropractic and osteopaths were preferred over medical doctors, and alternative treatments were not uncommon, and strange ideas of how what kind of many Bible students thought they had certain ailments. A lot of them were hypochondriacs, and thought they were sick when they weren't. And so these are the things that were part of the culture, that were instilled within the culture of this man of the 19th century. That carried on through, that had impacts that affected millions of lives. And I'm sure that many Jehovah's Witnesses, many of the things that I'm talking about in the Bible students are familiar to Jehovah's Witnesses, because many Jehovah's Witnesses could trace their roots back to the days of Charles Taze Russell. And while they stayed loyal to the society, many of the aspects, it surprises me how much of the culture of the Watchtower reminds me of the Bible students, and even today, when I hear some of the things that are talked about within the movement, it's not too far off from what I experienced growing up in the Bible students as a Bible student child. Now, of course, the Bible students shrank over the years, and whereas the Jehovah's Witnesses growth far overshadowed that of the Bible students. But the Bible students were never about growing. In fact, they were sort of expecting the movement to die away, because we were near the end times. We were always on the threshold of Armageddon and the end of this world, and we're still on that threshold. We're in the time of trouble, and very soon the last of the church will be making their calling and election sure. And when that happens, the world will end, and the Lord will set up His kingdom, and all these institutions that Satan controls will be destroyed in Armageddon, and Satan will be bound, and God will set up His kingdom under Christ and the church, and will rule for 1,000 years, utopia. And, in that sense, what the expectations of Jehovah's Witnesses and Bible students really doesn't differ very much, except the degree to which control will be. I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that the governing body and the headquarters will be the agents of God during the 1,000 years, and whereas the Bible students think, as Brother Russell taught, that the ancient worthies will be resurrected and they will be the ones in charge. But outside of some of these little details, the overarching ideas aren't too far apart, and they shouldn't be, because they had a very similar origin. And but anyway, one last thing. My grandson, he attends kindergarten remotely. That's one of these things that we wouldn't have otherwise had to do, but because of the mishandling of the COVID crisis, we're forced to watch a 5-year-old. That's kind of tough when you're in your 60s and you take on a little 5-year-old. It's tough enough when you're in your 20s and 30s, but when you've had it and you've been through it and you don't have the energy, it's a little tough. But that's the world we find ourselves in right now. But anyway, we love our grandson tremendously, and he doesn't have to grow up with the things that we grew up with. And it was sad, because while the teacher said, tomorrow we want the class to wear their Halloween costumes, and this is something that, little kids, they get excited about. And one little girl said, my mommy and daddy and I, we don't celebrate Halloween. And now it doesn't automatically mean she's Jehovah's Witnesses. Of course, there are other Christian groups that are very conservative and don't adhere. They take a strict interpretation of such things, and they don't celebrate Halloween. But the likelihood is that she was a Jehovah's Witness child, and it's sad to me to see this poor little girl who's left on the outs, so she's socially, and it means so much to these kids, because at that age they're at the mercy of this world, and to see their peers all be able to do something, and they're not allowed to do something. And they don't understand why. All they know is that they're left out, and it has to hurt. I mean, I think of that movie with Kevin Costner. It was had Clint Eastwood, and it was directed by Clint Eastwood. A Perfect World, where the little boy got to trick or treat. He was a Jehovah's Witness boy, but it just made me think of that. And now, being a Bible student was sort of a mixed bag. I mean, Bible students never necessarily gave up Christmas, because Charles Russell didn't condemn it. But there were Bible students who did. They did condemn Christmas. There were Bible students who did. My wife wasn't allowed to go trick-or-treating because her dad said it was spiritism. So there were Bible students that did that, and it's a shame. But anyway, that's what we're trying to cure, isn't it? That's what we're trying to, and by realizing these things, these human flaws that these people had, they were not special. They were flawed individuals who created this religion. And what makes us think that they had the truth? Now, the truth is demonstrated by results. If something is true, then whatever is associated with it, the outcome, the prediction, then occurs. If something is not true, the evidence should be able to sift out the matter, whether something is or isn't true. And none of the evidence that we have indicates that what we were taught and they had failed us, because what they taught us wasn't the truth. And I know it's very difficult for some when they first realize that they've been duped, to the range of emotions that that one undergoes when you come to this realization that all your life you believe something that wasn't true. But it does in the end, it's a far better thing. And I want to know the truth. In fact, I'm far more sensitive to truth versus lies today than I ever was before, because of my experience growing up, and the years as an adult in the Bible students movement, and then finally coming to the realization that what I had believed and what I had been taught wasn't true, and that the men that taught us these things were very flawed. So anyway, I've gone on way too long, and I hope this meant something. And anyway, it's a little trip down Bible student lore. So this is Truth Seeker, wishing you all the best.